Hey, this is Giovanni from the Sicilian Secret Diet Plan, and this is a webinar that Sandra and I gave on the benefits of the Mediterranean lifestyle on Healthspan. And this is a topic that is fundamental to the way we look at medicine and lifestyle changes in how we treat our patients. So I think you'll find this fascinating. Some of this information can be very helpful. So we're going to talk about many different things, including can diet and lifestyle changes improve health span? We'll talk about studies that have shown lifestyle changes and how they affect things like heart attacks. We'll talk about the metabolic syndrome, how you diagnose the metabolic syndrome and what it means in terms of risk of disease. Also obesity. Obesity is a disease, and it's associated with many downstream diseases. The information that we get from a body composition is very helpful to determine risk. We'll talk about the difference between junk food carbohydrates versus healthy food carbohydrates, and the fruit and vegetable intake in the United States, and how it's quite low, and how coronary disease or atherosclerosis is a lifestyle disease. That means that it's caused by how we live our lives, how we eat, how we exercise, how we stress well or not stress well, and all the different fad diets that are out there and why they may or may not be helpful, and the reality of the American diet. And then what is an optimal way of eating? The different studies that have shown which ways of eating are the best. We'll talk a little bit about the concentration of nutrients in foods and how it's different now than it was 40 years ago. And the Mediterranean diet pyramid, how that is different than other types of eatings pyramids. The Mediterranean diet in cancer, the data on Mediterranean diet and cognitive function and its effect on chronic diseases. And then finally, we'll talk about how exercise affects our metabolism and inflammation, how that affects most chronic diseases, the gut microbiome, and can we reverse disease? That's a big question. We'll talk about in the beginning how we prevent disease, and then we'll go into a more advanced version where you actually can have established disease that's reversed. And can we reverse things like cancers? What about genetics? Can we affect how our genetics affect our disease patterns? And then finally, we'll talk about the effects of these things on our brain and what is an optimal lifestyle. And hopefully this will be informative, interesting, and may help you in improving your health span.
Tonight's program is being co-presented by, this is my cardiologist here. So this is Dr. Giovanni Campanile and his wife, Sandra Cammarata. And I'm going to let them do the formal introduction of themselves to give the proper, educational background and all of that. But I will tell you the topic, which we can see here. It's the benefits of a Mediterranean lifestyle on Healthspan. And I know that this has been very timely, and a lot of physicians are interested in this for their patients, themselves, and their family. And I think we're in for a real good presentation tonight. The Dr. Campanile and Dr. Cammarata have said that we'll tackle questions as we go. So if you prefer to do it that way, that's fine. And then, as is typical, we have question and answer at the end. So without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to our speakers for tonight.
So we're definitely honored to be here tonight to talk about one of the things that is, of course, we have the most passion about. We wrote a book about it, and that is the benefits of the Mediterranean diet and lifestyle on Healthspan. I'm Sandra Cammarata. I'm a physician. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist and an adult psychiatrist.
And I'm Giovanni Campanile. I'm a cardiologist, and I did my all my training up in Boston in the Harvard system, And I'm a reformed interventional cardiologist. I used to do a lot of interventions, but then I was fortunate to meet some people, high-level people in the naturopathic world, like Dr. Joe Pizzorno, who was the president of Bastyr University, and we created a program to teach allopathic physicians the benefits of naturopathic medicine. And I learned this many years ago, and I became the director of the Dean Ornish Reversal of Heart Disease program, which is a phenomenal program that uses lifestyle change to actually reverse heart disease. And I'll show you some information about that. And then Sandra and I wrote the book on the Mediterranean diet from Sicily.
I'm Sicilian, as you can hear from my accent.
And we use what we talk about, nutrition and lifestyle change in our practices quite a bit. So we're very passionate about this. And
also because we see the results. When people do change their lifestyle, mood, physical activities, sense of well-being, and definitely heart disease, chronic illnesses improve.
So the first question is, can diet and lifestyle change improve health span? Now, health span is the period of time in your life, at the end of your life, that can be either ridden with disease or free of disease. That's why we want to improve health span. Longevity is nice, but you really want to be free of disease at the end of your life. And the way to be free of disease is to prevent the major causes of problems with health span. And that's heart disease, cancer, dementia, and also have vitality. So we think this is quite feasible. We see a lot of patients that adhere to these lifestyle and do very well. And so it's not only can we prevent disease, but we can also reverse early established disease. And I'll show you data about that.
So the question is, how do we stay healthy till the very end? 80% of people over the age of 60, 65 have at least one chronic illness. How do I avoid that?
So part of my training was at the Framingham Heart Study. And one of the things that was said there, that because of the prevalence of heart disease in America, is that everyone in America gets heart disease at some point in their life. So the idea is not to get the heart attack at age 60, but to get the heart attack 99 and, die in your sleep at age 99. And that's what health span is all about. And in fact, many studies have shown this. In this study that was published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, 20,000 men were studied, and those having a healthy diet, moderate alcohol intake, no smoking, exercise, and no abdominal adiposity reduced their risk of heart attacks by 80%, quite a remarkable reduction. So obesity and metabolic syndrome is a major problem and an epidemic, and getting worse. Metabolic syndrome is the syndrome where you have increased waist circumference, increased blood pressure, increased fasting blood sugar, increased triglycerides, and low good or HDL cholesterol. And if you have metabolic syndrome, then your risk for many things, many bad things go up, including heart disease, dementia, cancer, etc. So one of the things that we have discovered is that it's not the subcutaneous fat. Subcutaneous fat is somewhat protective. We've evolved to develop subcutaneous fat in previous eras in the evolution of mankind. At the end of the summer in many parts of the world, we would eat more fruits and then go into the winter, and that subcutaneous fat would help us survive the winter. But what's happened now with excessive eating is that we start developing not only subcutaneous fat, but this other form of fat called visceral adipose tissue. And that can be around the heart, around the pericardium, epicardial, it could be intraperitoneal. And this fat is different from subcutaneous fat. It's very inflammatory. And we now know that inflammation, wherever it comes from, can increase the risk of heart disease, cancer risk, and dementia.
And depression and anxiety.
Sandra focuses on those things. So obesity, there's controversy about whether obesity is a disease or not a disease. Obesity is a disease. And there's a lot of bad things associated with obesity. Atherosclerotic heart disease, high cholesterol, hypertension, erectile dysfunction, polycystic ovarian disease, a lot of dementia, early Alzheimer's, osteoporosis, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, gout, sleep apnea, and sarcopenia or muscle loss. So obesity is a upstream factor that affects us in many bad ways. In my practice, a more advanced way to look at body composition is with these types of impedance body composition analysis, which tells us what your visceral fat area is. And this is much more important than knowing what your weight is, or even what your BMI is, body mass index, based on height and weight. So with a body composition such as this one, we can tell your percent body fat, which should be between 18 and 25, and your visceral fat area. That's very important. So when I follow my patients, as they lose weight, I make sure they don't lose skeletal muscle mass, because you don't want to lose skeletal muscle mass to a significant degree, and try to lose their visceral fat area. So another problem is terminology of foods. This is a big problem because carbohydrates, for instance, are frowned upon. And in this picture, you can see that the left side are carbohydrates and the right side are carbohydrates. But these are two different foods. They should not have the same name. The foods on the left are what we call empty calories. And I think what we talk about in our book is nutritional intelligence. And our bodies, the reason why we eat is for nutrition. And if you eat empty calories, our bodies are looking for more and more nutrition, and you end up eating a lot of calories with not a lot of nutrition, and you get obese. On the other hand, if you eat colorful fruits and vegetables, beans, legumes, not a lot of meat, but some meat, not a lot of eggs, but some eggs, a Mediterranean style diet with a lot of fish, the phytonutrient content is excellent, and your body gets satiated much more readily. So the average American eats about 1.5 servings of vegetables and less than 1 serving of fruit per day. And only 1 in 11 meets the guidelines for greater than 5 servings per day. And 1 in 9 eat no fruit or vegetables on the day of the survey. And this survey has been repeated, and it's pretty reproducible. And many people think that 2 or fewer servings were sufficient for good health. So this shows us not only that the nutrition quality is not good, but also the concepts of what good nutrition is not known by the general public. So this says, my only consolation is by eating us, they're killing themselves. This is because meat in excess, and again, in the Mediterranean diet, we do propose eating meat, good quality meat, in small quantities, but not in excess. And so that's just a foundation of the Mediterranean diet. So coronary artery disease as the number one cause of a decrease in health span is a lifestyle disease. Bill Castelli, who is the director of the Framingham Heart Study, where I did some research when I was a resident, said that of the 6 billion people on the planet, about 5 billion people will never get coronary artery disease because they don't have the lifestyle that promotes it. In both the Korean War and the Vietnam War, and autopsy studies of unfortunate young GIs, average age 20, most Americans had some degree of coronary artery disease already at that age, while in the Vietnamese group of boys that died in that terrible war did not show any sign of coronary artery disease. And then other studies that looked at civilian casualties between the ages of 16 to 34 from accidents, suicides, and homicides in the United States 100% of the autopsies show some degree of coronary artery disease. And in fact, there are fetus studies with ultrasound showing that the fetus already has the beginning of fatty streaks. And an interesting phenomenon occurred in World War II in Norway. The Nazis removed all the livestock from Norway in order to feed their troops, and people subsisted on more of a plant-rich diet. And what happened was the coronary artery disease death rate was almost eliminated, and that persisted for the entire war. And then after the war, when the livestock was reintroduced, then the CAD death rate went back up to a typical Western country. And there's parts of the world where there's no animal protein. They eat a vegetarian diet. Teams of people have gone in to look for coronary artery disease and couldn't find anyone with any degree of coronary artery disease. While in America, if we pick anyone off the street, we could easily find some signs. So this is why in America, we're looking for an easy way out. If you look at Amazon, there's 260,000 diet books, and there's all types of fad diets. And Americans are, somewhat confused about what's good and what's not good. But in reality, even though the American Heart Association has said to eat less fat, and what's happened is, since 1950, we're eating more fats, more sweeteners, about 800 calories more per capita per day, and 57 pounds more meat per year. So our diets are not good. And what we've discovered recently, we're doing polygenic risk score analysis for heart disease, but there's also a polygenic risk score for obesity. And it appears that 50% of Americans have the polygenic risk score that predisposes them to obesity. And when someone has the polygenic risk score and they're put in an obesogenic environment, and any Western country is an obesogenic environment because we have food all over the place, you become obese. And that the degree of obesity correlates with this polygenic risk score.
So it means that if people immigrate from countries where they were thin or they did not have any coronary artery disease and they come into the United States, that first generation will have the risk factors for obesity.
And this is also exemplified by the Japanese who immigrate from Japan to Hawaii and then to the United States. And Hawaii has like an intermediate type of SAD diet, standard American diet. We call it the SAD diet. There's intermediate risk in Hawaii and then full risk once they get to America. So the idea is to eat less crap, carbonated drinks, refined sugars, artificial sweeteners and colors, and processed food, and eat more food, fruits and vegetables, organic lean protein, omega-3 fatty acids and fish, and drink water. Stay hydrated.
So what is the optimal way of eating? What we have discovered through multiple studies is that, and the U.S. World News and World Report for 5 years in a row has established and rated the Mediterranean diet as the best diet to prevent chronic illnesses, coronary artery diseases, and cancer and dementia. So we know that Mediterranean diet and its food and its nutrients are beneficial against inflammation, beneficial against oxidative stress, dysmetabolism, vascular dysfunction, adiposity, senescence, cognitive decline, neurodegenerative illnesses, cancer. And so when doing so prevents all chronic diseases and improves well-being. So the way we eat really matters. What we eat really matters. We are what we eat, and we are also what we do not eat. So we need to consume mostly plant, 5 to 6 servings, and now they're actually increasing to about 6 servings recommendations of fruits and vegetables every day. And I think every year we're probably going to increase the amount that is needed because soil quality is important. So, and we're going to get to the next slide in a moment to let you know. So for 1950, for example, one apple had 4.3 milligrams of iron. Today, we need 26 apples to have the same amount of iron. And that is because our quality of soil has depleted so much that even if we eat a beautiful organic apple, we still get 0.18 milligrams of iron.
And this is an important point because a lot of people ask, should I buy organic and is organic better? And yes, organic is better because it's cleaner, but that doesn't tell you anything about the soil quality. So if you have like a depleted, thin soil from some places, it doesn't have the nutrition. And this is what Sandra's talking about.
So what is that is recommended? Again, 5 to 6 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, possibly 6. And to have whole grains and beans most days. So 4 to 6 times a week to have a whole grain and a bean. And variety always matter. So there are multiple whole grains, there are multiple different kinds of beans, and variety matters because every food has a different ratio of macronutrients that are essential to our well-being. So fish is recommended 2 to 3 times a week because of the omega-3, and we'll spend a little bit more time talking about omega-3. Eggs continues to be probably, and dairy, one of the most controversial recommendations. So right now, I think we sit about 4 eggs per week as a pretty safe.
4 yolks, egg whites, you can eat as many as you want.
And whole milk is better than low-fat milk because it actually has some help, some stimulation of insulin. So most studies at this point are recommending whole milk and in moderation, though small amounts. And 1 fermented beverage, if not 2 per day, to build up our microbiome. And a yogurt is a perfect example of a good and healthy fermented food. And
other fermented foods are kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha, but we really promote increasing the microbiome, which we'll talk more about later, with fermented foods.
And then healthy fats. And what are the healthy fats? Of course, coming from Italy and Sicily specifically, extra virgin olive oil is the healthiest fat that we have, is the liquid gold. It helps with everything as a good anti-inflammatory agent. And avocado is another healthy oil. Now, Mediterranean diet. The word diet comes from the Greek word that means lifestyle. So while food is medicine and is the best medicine for longevity and health span, also all the other lifestyles that come with it are very helpful. And we'll spend more time talking about exercise, stress reduction, sleep, and connections with others.
Yeah, some people talk about superfoods. We really don't believe are any superfoods that one food can really, but there is a superfood way of eating and a lifestyle. And this is what this is all about. This is, what you do on a regular basis. If every once in a while you go off the wagon, that's not a big deal. But what you do on a regular basis, getting all those phytonutrients, because all the plants, the rainbow colors of the plants, it's very important to mix that up because each color is a different phytonutrient, flavonoid, carotenoid. So you have to get these on a regular basis in order to get the benefits.
So fish, we're talking about, we'll spend more time talking about omega-3. How do we remember what is the good fish to eat? Small, oily fish. And if we can remember SMASH, S for salmon, M for mackerel, A for anchovies, S for sardines, and H for herring. These are the best fish with the highest content of omega-3 and the lower amount of mercury. Interesting enough, though, we're now finding studies that say that in spite of high levels of mercury, the amount of omega-3 we get in our diet is more important than the mercury itself. So the omega-3 offsets the damage of mercury. And one of the things we find out when we're writing our book and the research in our book, that actually what we put in our fish can mitigate the mercury. So we have this great sauce that is called sal marillo that has all the components that can take away part of the mercury.
It actually chelates out the mercury, and then you eliminate it.
So it's lemon, it's garlic, cilantro, or parsley, olive oil. So
this is a sauce that if you put on the fish, it helps chelate the mercury out of the fish, which is quite interesting. And in Sicily, they've been doing this for hundreds, thousands of years. So mercury's been around for a long time. And so this may be something that our ancestors have passed down to us as a nutritional knowledge.
So
this is a meta-analysis of the Mediterranean diet and cancer. And multiple studies have shown a reduction in cancer, bladder cancer, blood cancer, breast cancer, colorectal cancer, gastric cancer, liver cancer, even pancreatic cancer with a Mediterranean diet. And this has been shown over and over again. And this is one of the reasons why U.S. News and World Report has rated the Mediterranean diet as, best diet 5 years in a row. The other improvement with this type of eating and lifestyle is cognitive function. And this is another meta-analysis of multiple studies that have consistently shown a significant improvement in cognitive function and the delay of cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease in people that adhere to this kind of diet. You may have heard of blue zones, and blue zones are places around the world where people live long, their health span is excellent, and their cognitive function is very good. And this is the type of diet they typically adhere to. And it's very similar around the world. There's different diets like the Okinawa diet and the diet in Italy, the diet in Greece. There's a lot of commonalities to all these diets. And then in most chronic diseases benefit from a Mediterranean diet. Heart disease mortality, coronary heart disease incidence, stroke incidence, myocardial infarctions, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, as I mentioned earlier, and breast cancer again.
So in United States, we are definitely not missing macronutrients. We're overnourished. And like Giovanni was telling before, when we eat too many empty calories, very often we're actually malnourished. And a lot of us don't have enough of those essential vitamins, essential minerals that we can get but from the diet. So if we do not have a healthy diet in spite of obesity, in spite of elevated BMI, we might be deficient in specific nutrients. And if we cannot optimize our diet due to lifestyles, working too many hours, commuting too many hours, too many obligations, we have to know what are the essential nutrients that we can possibly get from supplements. Right now, take all the supplements, but there are some supplements that if our diet is not fully good, we need to take from supplementation.
And this is, again, because our soil is depleted. And it's very difficult to create healthy soil. Our son, in fact, is a permaculture farmer in North Carolina. And he's been working on his soil for about 7 years. And still, the soil doesn't have the optimal nutrients in it like he would like to see. So in factory farms where they have to produce a lot of food in a short period of time, the soil tends to be depleted.
So vitamin D is probably one of the easiest supplements for us to take if our lifestyle does not accommodate for a healthy level of vitamin D. And we usually make vitamin D for sun exposure, from sun, but 70% of people in the United States don't have sufficient levels of vitamin D. And sufficient levels of vitamin D are defined as greater than 30 nanograms per millimeters. So several meta-analysis studies that go back as far as 1960s supported that having levels less than 30 nanograms is associated with lower all-cause mortality. So a level
higher all-cause
higher. So a level of vitamin D below 20 nanograms, we start to have problems with immune response, and that's why mortality rate goes up. So why do we have this widespread vitamin D deficiency? Because we spend a lot of time working inside. We don't expose ourselves to sunlight enough. And when we do, we wear a lot of sunscreen, and sunscreen inhibits the absorption of vitamin D. Also, there are some age-related factors. An adult age 70 will start producing probably 25% less vitamin D than if they were in their 20s. And then is the amount of melanin that we have in our skin. The melanin is what determines our skin colors that can also interfere with the absorption of vitamin D. So for people who are vitamin D deficient, a supplement of about 4,000 IU per day is probably good to maintain a good levels. Vitamin D is a very unique kind of the vitamins. It gets converted in the liver to 25-hydroxy, and then in the kidney to 125-hydroxy, and that is actually becomes a hormone. And this hormone is necessary to activate and deactivate our genes working with the DNA. So, and it does it in a very, with synchrony. So that...
And this goes back to, genetically, we're still hunter-gatherers. And in the hunter-gatherer days, people were outdoors. They didn't have sunblock, obviously. They didn't wear shirts. And some people think the sweating when you're outdoors, like sweating and getting the sun and then leaving the sweat on without taking a shower, is part of the vitamin D absorption. And it's interesting that in other societies like Eskimos, they eat a lot of blubbery fat, and vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, and they used to get it, they get it more from their diet. But, today we don't eat the blubbery fat, and we don't go outdoors in, undressed. So it's a big problem.
So another easy supplement to take in if we don't get it from our diet, and again, we always recommend the food first. But where is our magnesium? Our magnesium is located in the chlorophyll in the leafy green vegetables, and a lot of us don't eat enough of that. So magnesium is an essential mineral. 50% of people in the United States don't get enough magnesium. And the RDA recommendation is about 400 IU per day, 400 milligrams per day. But if you are active, you exercise a lot, you sweat a lot, or you use a sauna on a regular basis, you're probably going to eliminate 20, 30% or more magnesium. So you're going to need, instead of 400, 420, 430 milligrams. So magnesium is essential for 300 different enzymes in our body and important for repairing DNA damage. So we know that is one of the reasons why these foods and minerals are essential for longevity and health span, because they keep on repairing DNA. They work on the DNA. And so observational study showed that people that have the highest magnesium level have 40% less all-cause mortality rates. That is significant. So, and they have 50% less of cancer incident. So, where's magnesium? Green leafy vegetables and also legumes, almonds, and oats. So,
and this is a meta-analysis of a prospective cohort study showing that in most of these studies, the all-cause mortality was reduced with optimal magnesium levels. And in my practice in cardiology, I have a lot of patients that have things like PVCs, or they have palpitations, and just simply giving them magnesium not only helps that, but also I find it to be very helpful lowers high blood pressure, and certain types of magnesiums help sleep. Some people take it right before bedtime.
So the other thing that we're seeing in a lot of recent studies is the effect of magnesium on cognition, and the earlier we take magnesium supplements, the better cognitive health is later on. So start early is very important. Start with kids even is very, very important. And the two kinds of magnesium that have an easier time crossing the brain barrier are magnesium glycinate and magnesium L-threonate.
Yeah, and in my practice, in our practice, we measure the serum magnesium is really not reliable. You have to do an RBC magnesium level, and this really tells you what the intracellular magnesium is.
So, omega-3 are probably one of the healthiest and most important food essential fatty acids that we need to take in. A Harvard study identified the intake of marine sources of omega-3 as one of the top 6 things that we can ingest to prevent death. It's estimated that about 84,000 deaths per year can be attributed to not getting enough EPA and DHA. So we have 3 essential fatty acids, and we have the alpha-linoleic acid, ALA, that is mostly plant-based. And then we have the DHA and the DPA that are mostly marine sources of omega-3, meaning fish and microalgae. So even someone that is a vegetarian can get their marine source of omega-3s through the algae. So the ALA, the alpha-linoleic acid, omega-3 fatty acid, is present in plant and can be converted into DPA and DHA, but that conversion is not very efficient. EPA is not a very efficient conversion. Some people are better than others to make the conversion, and some people are not. And also what we have found out is that people that have high levels of omega-6 which some levels of omega-6 are good, but too much omega-6, actually what it does, it comes from fast food, oil, seed oils, too many seed oils, can interfere with that enzyme that converts the ALA to DHA and EPA. So now, could we get enough ALA? Possibly from our diet, but the majority of us do not eat enough flaxseed, enough chia seeds, enough of all the plant foods that is rich in omega-3. A very interesting thing is that estrogen dramatically increases that conversion. And so what happens is that during pregnancy, estrogen levels increases dramatically, 100 times more. And so that is probably the major way to help mothers to give enough DHA to their babies, the brain, the neurological development of the baby. So for a long time, women were discouraged from eating fish because of the mercury content, but we did a lot of disservice to these babies. So DHA is essential always. EPA is essential always, but especially during pregnancy and the first few years of age. So I'm now testing a lot of my patients and kids, and I see that their omega-3 levels are very, very low. So the majority of United States citizens have an omega-3 index, which is how we test the level of omega-3 in the body, less than 5%. Well, we want an optimal level of 8%. So the studies have shown that people that have an omega-3 index of 8% have a 5 years increase in health span and longevity compared to people that have an omega-3 level of 4%. So significant. And there is a very interesting study that shows the omega-3 level of smokers, and the omega-3 levels of smokers that is 8%, those people have the same life expectancy than a non-smoker with omega-3 level less than 4%.
That's remarkable.
Pretty remarkable. So, eat your fish.
And this has been shown in some cultures around the world that have they eat a lot of fish naturally, like in Japan. Their omega-3 fatty acid index is like 8 to 10%. In America, it's like Sandra said, it's low, like 4%. And the cardiovascular death rate in those countries is very low because of that. And this slide shows this meta-analysis about cardiovascular risk, and it shows in most studies a reduction in cardiovascular risk with elevated omega-3 fatty acid levels.
And again, cognition improves with omega-3, and mood improves significantly with the omega-3.
So another factor that's becoming more and more apparent that helps longevity and health span is sleep. And that's another factor where Americans don't get enough sleep in general. And both short sleep and long sleep, significantly short sleep and significantly long sleep are associated with increased mortality. But getting an optimal amount of sleep is important because we've recently discovered that our brains, as opposed to our bodies, we have a lymphatic system that detoxifies our body. Our brain doesn't have a lymphatic system. We have a glymphatic system. And the brain at night in deep sleep only, channels open up, and the brain gets flushed of its toxins.
Actually, what they see is that the cells shrink a little bit. allowing for more of this detoxification. So the proteins that have been broken down in the cells start to be eliminated, and the white plaque doesn't form. And this occurs mostly in the last 2 hours of sleep. So if you don't get those 8 hours of sleep, your detoxification decreases.
So as this slide shows, all-cause mortality, total heart disease, stroke, and coronary heart disease all are affected by sleep. And in fact, in our risk analysis of patients for heart disease, we now ask about sleep.
They've done a study on children and adolescents, looking at the amount of sleep that adolescents had, and then following them into the 30s and 40s, 50s, and they found that kids who had less sleep were a much higher chance of developing multiple sclerosis.
And this falls into the epidemic we have of why, some people ask, why is it in America or in Western countries in general, we have high lipid levels and our high lipoproteins? And this is not only diet, it's our lifestyle in general. This is why we're talking about lifestyle. That includes sleep, includes stress, includes not being isolated or being connected. So all these things and exposure to infectious diseases, inflammation, they all increase lipoproteins and our risk for heart disease. And sleep apnea is also a major risk factor for all-cause mortality. And I do a home sleep study on many of my patients, and I am always surprised. Thin patients that you would never expect, sometimes have severe sleep apnea. And so this is another major risk factor for heart disease, strokes, and all-cause mortality.
And kids who have a lot of problems with the adenoids, tonsils, end up having sleep apnea for many years, and now obesity has increased in kids too. So we see much more sleep apnea in children too. So anyway, we're talking about lifestyle, and
we're talking to a group of people that exercise is very important for. So exercise, as you can see, is, and this better than we know, is very important.
Do we have a question in the Q&A that we need to address?
Yes, there's a question in the chat box. I didn't want to interrupt as you were going. So the question says, do you see any correlation between the time of day that a person eats a large meal and the patient's well-being? And they said, having spent 6 years in Italy, so someone was on the call tonight, on the webinar, spent 6 years in Italy, and eating a big lunch and a small salad and cheese for dinner, my health was 100% better. So, correlation between time of day, eating a large meal, and well-being.
Yes, there is definitely correlation. What we now know is there's a diurnal pattern. In fact, the Nobel Prize was given for the researcher that discovered this. Is we have a diurnal variation in our cells, in our organs, and in our ability to digest foods. And it appears that we're able to digest, especially carbohydrates, but also there's some evidence for proteins earlier in the day than we are late at night. And this is, we have a podcast, and we interview experts in areas, and we interviewed Dr. Walter Longo. He's an internationally renowned expert on fasting, and this falls into this because what he has discovered is that if you do periods of fasting, like time-restricted eating, and he recommends 12 to 14 hour, do not eat 3 hours before you go to bed. So eat a light supper, basically, and a bigger meal for lunch. And also, he has experimented with something called fasting mimicking diet, where every so often you eat very low calories, 1,000 calories on day one for 5 days, and then 700 calories the remaining days. This augments our body's ability to get rid of cancer cells, this phenomenon called autophagy. And it, we have this mechanism in our bodies where we always are developing cancer cells. So we have a mechanism to eliminate these cancer cells, and this sort of eating patterns help, augment that process.
And if you think about it, before the Industrial Revolution, everybody ate the biggest meal in the middle of the day. People were working the fields and they received the major meal then, and then they would go home at night and have something very small, and usually some vegetables or soup or something light, or even skip dinner anyway. And it's only during the Industrial Revolution that started changing. People didn't have more time anymore to eat at lunch. Lunch break was very small, and fast food started taking place, and the people didn't make their own food anymore.
Yeah, there's a phenomenon we saw when we were looking at this in Sicily. In America, the poorer you are, the earlier you die, because a big reason for that is how you eat. Because poor people in America eat fast food, they drink a lot of soda, and in Italy or in Sicily, the poor people actually eat better than the people in the cities, and they eat a big meal in midday, and then they eat a very light supper. And this, I think, is a big part of their longevity.
So exercise can improve brain health, help manage weight, reduce blood pressure, strengthens bones, muscles, and improves the ability to do everyday activities. There's a big difference to have two 90 years old, right? The one that is sitting in a wheelchair needs to be fed. So we have that health span for both of them, but we have the longevity for both of them, but the health span can be different. The second man might still be able to tie its own shoes, eat on his own, go out for dinner, take walks. So that's why we stress the health span. Health span is the ability to be old and be independent and to be able to move. And exercise does that. So what exercise really does is that it increases temporarily stress level in our body. If you look at the biomarkers of someone who's exercised, heart rate is very high, blood pressure is very high, inflammatory markers are very high. You can say this guy's going to die anytime soon. But then what happens? When the exercise is over, the body starts repairing itself. That initial inflammation actually becomes a way to repair the DNA. Blood pressure starts coming down and stays down for long periods of time. Heart rate comes down. The heart rate variability, we know, is a very important thing that we keep on creating in order to create that good health span that we're talking about.
Yeah, this is what we call a hermetic effect. And, we'll talk about this more about inflammation, how chronic long-term inflammation is a bad thing. But short-term inflammation, as Sandra's referring to, is a good thing. And that goes back to exercise, things like sauna, cold plunge or cold exposure. All these things are a short-term inflammatory thing.
And an interesting study was done on people who had colon cancer and breast cancer, and during exercise, they could actually see that the amount of cancer cells dropped significantly. So actually, people that exercise, the collagen level is better, so skin tone and everything. So exercise, sauna, cold plunge, like Giovanni was talking about, that they all do the same thing. They increase stress acutely and then chronically. They actually repair. And interesting is enough that there are some phytochemicals that can do exactly the same thing. For example, compounds that are found in different kind of plants is the sulforaphane that is present in broccoli. Does that. Resveratrol found in the skin of grapes or blueberries, curcumin that is present in turmeric, they activate the stress gene response and repair our DNA. So they keep us healthier and young longer.
And this is the exoskeleton is an important factor in Healthspan. And this is where physical medicine and rehabilitation is fundamental. Maintaining the exoskeleton so we can be vital and active throughout our lives is very important. Sarcopenia is a huge problem. We lose muscle mass as we get older. So maintaining muscle mass by resistance exercise and by eating enough protein. And the current thought is about 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight daily, because we can't store protein like carbohydrates and fat. So we need to eat that on a daily basis. And a lot of people don't realize that prevention of osteoporosis can be life-saving. If you get a hip fracture when you're in your 70s or 80s, there's a 40% mortality. So that is a big factor in terms of Healthspan. So this is an interesting study. This was done in an Amish community in Pennsylvania. And these people had an FTO gene, which is a gene that's associated with a increased in obesity. And the people in this study that kept physically active overrode that genetic predisposition to obesity. And in fact, people that did not maintain physical activity became obese. So it's an interesting example of how you can override a genetic predisposition. So inflammation, as I mentioned before, is very important. In cardiology, we now know that inflammation is as important or maybe even more important than lipids in terms of cardiovascular risk. In fact, in studies where lipids are lowered and inflammation is not lowered, the patients don't do nearly as well as when you lower inflammation and lipids. In fact, one of the ways statins probably are most effective is that they're very powerful anti-inflammatory agents. So not only does a statin lower cholesterol, but also lowers inflammation, which is maybe how they work, because we now know that inflammatory blockages in the arteries are very damaging. This is a study where people were given something akin to an Egg McMuffin, and then they ate this meal over 15 minutes, and then nuclear factor kappa B was measured, and the nuclear factor kappa B after this very fatty meal rose and stayed high for hours after the meal, and then went down precipitously. And that's when people became hungry again and went through this cycle of eating over and over. But this NF-kappa B, which is one of the inflammatory markers, is a very important factor in spreading cancers. It increases cancer stem cells, cellular metabolism of cancers, angiogenesis, tumor cell proliferation. And so it's a bad player in terms of inflammation and cancer risk. And this is the CANTOS trial, which looked at a pharmaceutical agent, very powerful anti-inflammatory agent, showed a significant reduction in cardiovascular mortality and all-cause mortality in patients that received the pharmaceutical that lowered inflammation. In fact, it had a bigger effect than lowering lipids in the study. And then another study looking at colchicine, which, as you know, we use colchicine for gout, but colchicine was looked in chronic coronary disease, and there was a significant reduction by lowering the inflammation by using colchicine in cardiovascular death, spontaneous heart attacks, ischemic strokes, and the need for coronary revascularization. So we now use colchicine as an adjunct medication for patients with chronic coronary disease. So inflammation is a big deal in the nutritional world and in lifestyle. Poor diet, lack of exercise, stress, hidden allergens, hidden infections, toxins, and molds are all causes of inflammation. And the way to deal with inflammation, especially from a functional medicine or integrative medicine, or is to go to the root causes, stop inflammatory foods, and eat whole foods. These are the best ways. And a Mediterranean diet is basically an anti-inflammatory diet because of the a high degree of phytonutrients in the plants that are anti-inflammatory. And then exercise, activating the vagus nerve, like smelling the roses and meditating, that activates your vagus nerve.
Breathing.
Breathing exercises, very important. Food allergies, eating the right foods, and if you can't get the right food, sometimes taking supplements like a multivitamin, and then eating fermented foods very much help. Or if you can't eat fermented foods and the right foods, sometimes probiotics. So the Mediterranean diet has been shown in multiple studies to reduce the markers of inflammation. And this is, again, because of the omega-3, because of the phytonutrients, the carotenoids, the flavonoids, all these foods that you eat on a regular basis will reduce markers like CRP and interleukin-6, myeloperoxidase, and some other more advanced inflammatory markers that we look at. The other factor in foods is the glycemic index. Glycemic index refers to the rapidity that carbohydrates or sugars get into our bloodstream. And high glycemic index foods get into the bloodstream very quickly, and they affect our insulin release and our resistance to insulin. So it's very important to try to eat foods that are low in glycemic index. And we know, which foods are bad and which foods are good. So, foods with a high glycemic index, you can eat, but you should not eat them on a regular basis or in too high quantities, while the foods with a low glycemic index are much better from this perspective. So the other factor that is very important is the gut microbiome. I question my patients about their gut and their gut when I see a patient, and a lot of patients wonder why a cardiologist would do this. And this is because the inflammation frequently starts in the gut and it travels from the gut and goes to other places like the heart. Our gut, we're part of an ecosystem, and from the soil to our bodies and outside our bodies, we're part of this ecosystem, and we have more microbes in our gut, in our system, than human cells. And some people have asked, who's the host, the microbes or the human? It's a good question. But the bugs in our system, we're finding out more and more that they're essential. They're not. This is not just a secondary phenomenon. They're essential for optimal health. They digest food. They produce B vitamins and other vitamins. They regulate our hormones. They produce things like serotonin. They help excrete toxins, and they're very healing. So we need to eat the right foods, eat the right fibers, a mix of fibers, to keep this mix of microbiomes in our system as optimal as possible. If we don't do that, then this is what happens. This is what's called a leaky gut. The left side of this are healthy epithelial cells in the gut that have very tight junctions between cells, and they're designed to allow in micronutrients and nutrients that we need for health, and not to allow things that are in our gut that should not get into our system. Now, on the right side is what we call a leaky gut, where the cells have deteriorated, they start spreading apart, and toxins from inside our gut get into our system that shouldn't be getting in, like lipopolysaccharides, which is very much it's an endotoxin that's very much associated with bad health. So the next stage of prevention is reversal of disease, and this is a very important concept where disease is already present. Can we do something about it? Can we do something to get rid of disease? And that is very possible. This was one of the first studies to look at this was the Lyon heart study from Lyon, France, which compared the Mediterranean diet to not even a bad diet, the American Heart Association diet of that time, and showed in patients that had already established heart disease, by just improving the diet, it reduced cardiovascular risk significantly. And the very important thing about this trial is that it enrolled patients even into their late 80s. And even in your 80s, you can still have this beneficial effect. So our genetics are active throughout our lives, even later in life. This was the lifestyle heart trial. 48 men and women with moderate to severe coronary heart disease were randomly assigned to intensive lifestyle change, and that's diet, exercise, stress reduction, and connection, and group therapy. And major endpoints were looked at, like quantitative coronary arteriography, cardiac PET scan, and cardiac events. In patients with angina in that study, there was a 91% reduction in frequency in angina in just 1 month. And then the diameter of the coronary arteries actually improved. The atherosclerosis significantly reversed, and there was a 300% improvement in myocardial perfusion by cardiac PET scans. And this is an example of this. The top picture is quantitative arteriography, and you can visually see that the blockage in that artery increased. And then on the bottom picture, this is what we call the cardiac PET scan, which is the most advanced way to look at myocardial perfusion. There's a big defect at the apex of the heart, which improved significantly. And this was seen over and over in these patients. So the other, can lifestyle change affect cancer? And this is also to show that the same risk factors that are for heart disease and are also true for cancer and dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So this showed the same lifestyle change significantly decreased PSA. This is a scan of a patient with prostate cancer, which at baseline had a PSA of 6.4, and a year later, the scan showed a reduction in the prostate cancer and a reduction in the PSA. And so the other part of this is, can lifestyle beneficially affect gene expression? We now know that genes don't affect us without change. We can change the genetic expression. And so, we genetically, as I mentioned earlier, are still hunter-gatherers. And according to the thrifty gene theory, few, if any, genes have changed over the past 10,000 years. So we still have the same genes, but our environment has changed. And this is why we have this epidemic of disease, because if you take even a modern day hunter-gatherer and you put them in modern society, usually they don't survive very long. So this is, again, with lifestyle change, looking at the RAS family of oncogenes. These are genes that promote prostate and breast cancer. And this is what we call a heat map. Heat map is, because in these type of studies, we look at hundreds and thousands of genes. You don't want to look at them individually. So in this case, the red is when these oncogenes are turned on, and then green when they're turned off. And after a period of lifestyle change, you can see that the oncogenes were significantly downregulated. And then aging, which is part of lifestyle, part of anti-aging, we look at telomeres. Telomeres are those little caps at the end of our DNA that affect how long DNA survives. And telomerase is the enzyme, and the telomerase, which is related to the telomere length, increased after only 3 months of lifestyle change, and the actual telomere length actually changed after a period of time. In this case, was 5 years of lifestyle change.
So, I know it's late. I know we've kept you for a long time. So we just wanted to come to the end here. We know, we said Mediterranean diet can help everything. It helps mood, helps depression.
It even helps. This study here shows that by Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize, showing that meditation can also affect telomeres, which is quite remarkable.
So what we want is to establish this lifestyle changes that can improve the overall sense of well-being, and we know now everything that can affect that. But I just wanted to mention a quick study that was done on children in England, 9,000 children. They looked at their quality of life, and they found out that once they took away all, where they came from, socioeconomic factors, family of origin, the kids that were the happiest are the kids that ate 5 to 6 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. Kids who eat the Western diet has significant higher incidence of depression than kids that don't. So, what is the optimal lifestyle? We have 6 pillars of longevity and health span. And what are they? First of all, sleep those 7 to 9 hours per night, eat a Mediterranean diet, exercise at least 150 minutes per day. And of those 150 per week, sorry about that. Of those 150 minutes, make sure you have 2/3 of some resistance training exercise and 1/3 of aerobic exercise. Find a form of stress reduction, such as meditation, breathing exercises, gratitude practice. Find a sense of purpose in life. Maintain meaningful connections with others. And love well always.
So eat well, stress less, move more, and love more. That's the bottom line for improving health span. This is our book, and we also have a supplement, which for people that really can't maintain a good diet, we've designed this. We don't really believe in supplements. We believe in food. And, we think that food can be really the cornerstone of all this. So thank you, and hopefully this was of some interest.
Be well.
So thank you for an excellent talk. Very, very informative. We're going to open it up for question and answer. I'd actually like to start. So a couple of things. And one, I currently don't eat fish. I was actually thrilled to hear with the information you presented that and the reason I stopped was the mercury issue. But you're saying, and you presented convincing information that the risk of the mercury problem is outweighed by the benefits for the omega-3. And also,
in fact, they did a study on pregnant women, and they used mercury as an indicator of whether they were eating fish or not. And the women benefited from the children that, they were born from the high omega-3, despite having elevated mercury levels. And, we're talking about mild elevations of mercury. If you have serious elevations of mercury, that's a different story. But, the mercury fear shouldn't offset the idea of eating fish.
You also mentioned the chelation effect. So that was, and could you further discuss that a little bit? So in order to try to chelate the mercury, what was the recommendation specifically?
So, there are several natural food chelatings. Garlic is one of them, parsley, cilantro, olive oil, lemon, old lime.
And in the book, Sandra has a recipe for this ancient recipe of this sauce that you put on fish that has these ingredients.
And also using sauna can be a very effective chelation agent. There was a point that we tested our mercury that was slightly elevated. We started using sauna in our house on a regular basis. It tested a few months later, our mercury level went significantly down.
And then
we eat a lot of fish, so not surprised that mercury level was slightly elevated.
And if you stick to that acronym SMASH, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardine, and herring, those fish are very high in omega-3 and very low in mercury.
Another question came in here in the chat box. It says, where can we get your supplement?
Amazon.
Okay, kind of like everything, so we'll go to Amazon.
Right, yeah.
Like everything, but it has all the supplement of the diet that we were talking about, the 5 to 6 servings of fruits and vegetables, and actually they're even better. Sorry.
Yeah, we designed this to have the key ingredients of the Mediterranean diet in a supplement. So, if you can't always adhere to it, because we're running around all the time, this is something to think about.
Dr. Camp, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Mentioning is that if your omega-3 index is low, you can take 1.5 to 2 grams of DHA, EPA, and increase very fast.
So supplementing is not a bad idea. If you can't eat enough fish, 3 to 4 servings of fish weekly, then supplementing is a good idea. The omega-3 fatty acid index is a really good way to follow that.
Okay. The question I had, so Dr. Cammarata had mentioned, but the question is going to be for you, Dr. Campanile.
Okay.
She had mentioned, she said with 2 forms of magnesium, you could certainly improve sleep. And she said glycinate or threonate. And you had mentioned also can lower blood pressure. So my question is, can we get the double benefit? Which form of magnesium forms will also lower blood pressure? And if it's glycinate and threonate, then it also improves sleep.
Well, I have a preferential use of magnesium L-threonate because it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It's been shown by studies to prevent dementia. It helps sleep, and it also helps the cardiovascular system. So we measure in our practice RBC magnesium levels, and we find the L-threonate gets the highest levels but the glycinate, if you really need it for sleep, glycine, some people use glycine for sleep. So the reason why magnesium is chelated to these, citrate, oxalate, all these different chelated substances is to improve absorption, because magnesium by itself doesn't get absorbed very well. So, but I really like magnesium L-threonate.
Is there a dosing recommendation you have? Is it based upon the RBC level or not?
Yeah, I usually titrate it. I start out, with a few 100 milligrams, and then I measure RBC magnesium levels and take it from there. We see in general, when we first do our lab work, we see most patients have a very low RBC magnesium level.
Right.
And it's very effective for heart disease. In fact, in the intensive care unit, when we have patients with ventricular tachycardia, we sometimes use IV magnesium, and that gets rid of the ventricular tachycardia in many cases.
Right. You had mentioned also the kind of overlooked by, I guess, the general physician, but not the cardiologist necessarily, is the anti-inflammatory effect of statins. It's not just a lipid lowering effect. There's an anti-inflammatory effect.
Yeah, I mean, if you Google statins, it sounds like it's the devil in disguise, where it's going to kill you. But that's not true. I mean, statins is probably the most well-studied drug. Even though I'm a functional cardiologist and I don't like using drugs unless I have to, I do use them quite frequently. And because statins have been shown to be very safe, they're anti-inflammatory, and they have a lot of what we call pleiotropic effects. And in fact, during the COVID era, there's studies looking at people that were on statins did not die of lung disease because of the anti-inflammatory effect. In fact, there's a lower risk of dementia in people taking statins, and a lower risk of cancer. So, if needed, in patients that are, at risk, I definitely recommend it.
Okay. And yeah, I was going there, what you just said, that statins have come under a lot of criticism, and you just explained that, and that the criticism is unjustified. So,
yeah, well, it to a certain extent, it is justified. 3 to 5% of the patients do get real myopathy, and it may affect the mitochondria in a negative way. So usually we supplement patients on statins with coenzyme Q10, magnesium, sometimes carnitine to offset those problems. But I have I've been in practice for many years, and I have patients that have been on statins for 30 years and, without any, significant deleterious effect. And they really reduce heart attacks by 25%. So, a big effect.
Right. See, I'm looking for any other questions. Does anyone else out there have any other questions for our speakers? So I guess not seeing any, on behalf of the New Jersey Society of Physical Medicine Rehabilitation, I'd like to thank the doctors, Dr. Campanile and Dr. Cammarata, for an excellent presentation. And as I said in the beginning, I'm a patient actually of Dr. Campanile's. And, and no kidding, my health has improved significantly since I've come under your care. And I thank you very much from a personal level. So, again, thank you.
And I'm your patient, and I'm also doing better.
I'll do my best too. Yeah, and you're technically right. You're my patient as well. And hopefully you do as well as I have under your care. So I'll say it that way. And then for the rest of the group tonight, look out for our emails, and further schedule will be forthcoming. Okay.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, Todd. And I'll be
It's an honor to be here.
Great. You're welcome.